Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Equity and Innovation, how companies are investing in underrepresented leaders, founders, and social impact to drive change. I appreciate you taking the time to join us for this important program. My name is Nicole Tranchitella, and I am Accenture's Office Managing Director for the Philadelphia Metro. In this role, I'm responsible for driving the company's business here in the local Philly market, and I'm fortunate to lead over 2,100 Accenture people who call this Metro home. I also have the opportunity to represent our company in the marketplace to drive critical conversations around inclusive growth, just like this one. And while I'm hosting this event from the Philly region, I'm excited to have so many of you, not only from Philly, but also from New York and Boston and many of the other metropolitan areas across the country. So welcome. In the United States and around the world, the continued reawakening to racial inequity is catalyzing conversations across industries and leadership teams and creating new investments in a more equitable workplace. For today's program, our goal is to share how we can all move beyond talking points to real investments in policies, people, and technologies that reflect such an equity lens. We are excited to bring to the virtual stage several executives who can share their own journeys in a peer-to-peer learning format. Accenture has actually made our own investments in this space, and I'm going to briefly share a few examples to bring this to life. For several years, we've been delivering our Inclusive Plus work, sponsored by Nellie Barrero, who's Accenture's Global Inclusion and Diversity Lead, which measures the maturity of a client's inclusion and diversity strategy and uses a data-driven approach to understanding employees and customer sentiment to drive individual learning journeys, policy changes, and other actions that drive change. Another example is Black entrepreneurs continue to innovate, but unfortunately face bias and lack of access to capital and opportunities in the venture capital community, leaving a disproportionate small amount of funding. As you can imagine, big change is needed to affect a different outcome. And I'm proud to say that Accenture Ventures is helping lead that change. Through the Black Founders Development Program, it's a new initiative led by Accenture Ventures that's going to invest and support Black technology startup founders and entrepreneurs. And the aim is to help Black entrepreneurs advance and grow their technology business through greater, more direct access to venture capital, corporate mentorship, and strategic connections with Accenture business partners and clients. And you're going to hear from Kathy Ross, who actually leads this program from Accenture in this program shortly. Now, let's talk about the run of the show. As far as today's program, we're going to start with Jack Azagury, who's Accenture's U.S. Northeast Market Unit Lead. He's going to be in a conversation with Silicon Valley leader and Fortune 500 board member and strategic advisor and author, Shelly Archambeau. And they're going to have a fireside chat followed by a panel of leading executives who are solving for racial equity in new and innovative ways. Before we get started, and before I introduce our guests, I want to thank the University City Center and the Venture Cafe team for their leadership and collaboration on this event. You're going to hear from Science Center's new president and CEO, Tiffany Wilson, to close out this program. So now let me introduce our speakers. Let me start with Jack. Jack is, as I mentioned, he leads our Northeast Market Unit. And in this role, he's responsible for our clients across 10 states from Maine to Delaware and over 10,000 Accenture people who call the Northeast region home. During his 23-year career with Accenture, Jack has had several national and global roles, predominantly focused in the utilities industry. He's a member of Accenture's Global Management Committee and the Northeast Leadership Team. I've had the personal privilege and pleasure of knowing Jack for many of his 23 years and get to not only call him a colleague, but also a friend. So thank you, Jack, for your leadership and participation today. And I also want to introduce our special guest today, and that's Ms. Shellye Archambeau. Shellye is an experienced CEO and board director with a track record of accomplishments building brands, high-performance teams, and organizations. She currently serves on the boards of Verizon, Nordstrom's, Roper Technology, and Okta. She has over 30 years of experience in technology, leading organizations focused on B2B and B2C. She's a sought-after speaker on a variety of topics, including governance, risk, and compliance, as well as entrepreneurship and leadership. And most recently, she authored an amazing book, Unapologetically Ambitious, Taking Risks, Breaking Barriers, and Creating Success on Your Own Terms. It's a book that helps professionals achieve their aspirations and create the life that they want, that I would strongly recommend you read. I want to thank you, Shellye, for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to the fireside chat with Jack. So Jack, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Jack, you're muted.
The mute button that gets you every time. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you all for joining today. And Shellye, it's a pleasure to have this discussion with you. And I want to start, before we start, I read the book this weekend, and I have to say I truly, truly enjoyed it. It was extremely inspiring, and I would highly recommend that everybody get a copy and read it. It really was an enjoyable and inspiring read with great life lessons and work lessons. So really highly, highly recommend it. So Shellye, let's maybe start. One of the things that's amazing is how you've had a systematic and strategic way of approaching your career. And you've done so in light of many, many barriers that you face as an African-American woman at every turn. And obviously this year has been quite a challenging year, with many being awakened by the realities of systemic racism. I just wanted to get your views on, in this environment, in this year, what does this book represent to you and to the people that will read it?
And thank you. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this, Jack, and I appreciate the kind words about the book. So what does this mean for me now? Well, I wrote the book because I've been fortunate. I've been able to achieve most of the aspirations that I set for myself. And I want more people to be able to do that. And given that I learned early that the odds weren't in my favor, because I'm a Black woman here in the United States, I wanted to be able to provide kind of the strategic approaches, the strategies, right, the different tactics, things that I've learned and done right and wrong to others so they could also improve their odds. Because frankly, the odds, there are a lot of people that the odds are not in the favor for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't have to stop you. So when we look at what's happening now with the acute awareness that exists today with some of the different challenges that we have, especially as a Black community, what this book represents is hopefully inspiration. It represents the tactics and really a roadmap in many ways for how to work through it. Because while you can't control what people do to you, and you can't control what people say, you can control how you respond. And what I've learned through my life is that by being very intentional about how you respond to different situations, you can indeed turn the odds in your favor so that you can ultimately get what you want.
I think that's very true. And the degree to which you were intentional early on is something that I've heard very few people articulate and really implement. And you have a lot of tips and practical advice, and you back them up with stories. And I'd like to talk about a few of them. One is you talk about, you use the phrase a nasty case of imposter syndrome in life. And many of us know exactly what you mean when you talk about imposter syndrome. And you have a strategy and some practical steps to overcome it. Could please take us through that?
Definitely. So, by the way, imposter syndrome, I've been dealing with imposter syndrome my entire life. And notice I said dealing with, not dealt with. This is still current tense. Believe it or not, I still experience imposter syndrome from time to time, which is ridiculous. And that's really the point. What is imposter syndrome? It's that little voice. It's that little voice that comes into your head whenever you feel that you're getting ready to do something you've not done before, or when somebody's offering you an opportunity or a new job, right? Or participating maybe with a new group, whatever it might be, where suddenly this little voice tells you, you're not as smart as they think you are. What makes you think you can actually do that? You're not going to be able to hold your own with these people, right? It's the voice that basically tears at you, tearing down your confidence, reminding you of all the ways in which you're inadequate, right? Well, the challenge with this voice is it's not real. I mean, you hear it at the time, but let me tell you, it's not real, because studies show that almost everybody suffers from imposter syndrome at some point or another. What that means is that it's not you, it's the environment. So it's almost like television. You know, you watch it, sounds real, looks real, even feels real at times. You get scared, you get excited, right? Well, this voice, same thing. But I'm here to tell you, it's not real. So first thing is tell yourself that. So try to swat it away. If that doesn't work, then the second thing I do is whenever you feel it, you typically feel it because somebody's offering something to you. They're opening a door and inviting you in, a new opportunity, a new job, a move, right? Something. Well, they wouldn't offer it to you if they didn't believe that you could do it. So if you can't believe in yourself in that moment, believe them. All right. If that doesn't work, then my tried and true, fake it. Fake it until you make it. Act like you know what you're doing. Act like you are confident, because eventually you will know what you're doing. And listen, when I say I still experience it, I mean, here I was getting ready to walk into my first Verizon board meeting, right? Fortune 15 company. And at that point, I'd been a CEO for a decade. I'd served on public boards for over 8 years. All right. So it's not like I walked in, this is my first time. No, I've been doing this. But as I get ready to walk in, I look around and I'm like, oh my God, CEO of Walgreens, the former Secretary of Transportation, CEO of Aetna. I mean, what makes me think I can go toe to toe with these people? And then I'm like, really? The voice is coming now? Really? Okay. So I'm just telling you, it's okay if you have it. Learn how to deal with it and work through it, but don't let it stop you. Don't let it stop you. And if the fake it to the make it thing doesn't work for you, then get help. And by help, I mean cheerleaders. Put people around you that will build you up and remind you how capable you are, remind you of how good you are and what you can do. Because when that voice is talking to you and telling you that you're not capable, it's so loud, you can't remember a thing about what you actually have done. So you need people around you to hear and to listen to give you that support and that encouragement so that you can move forward. Because trust me, as I said, it's not real. Everybody's experiencing it. I think it's because we live in such a judgmental world. So don't let it stop you, whatever you do. Try 1, 2, 3, 4. There's more in the book, but figure out a way to work through it so that it doesn't stop your progress.
I think it's great advice, and I can confirm I've had that voice quite often in my head. So it definitely, I think probably 100% of the people on the call have it. Another area in your book, and as an introvert myself, this really resonated with me. You have a very strategic approach to mentoring and network, and we all know mentorship is critically important, especially in this day and age. Talk us a little bit about your strategy, how you've approached mentoring. I found it very, very valuable as I read the section of the book on that.
Well, I was very fortunate. I had experience relatively early in my career, about 6 years or so at IBM, where IBM decided that they wanted their high potential employees to have a mentor, and they were going to do it differently. They asked us, who would you like to be your mentor? And I said, oh, okay. So I thought about it. I picked a gentleman by the name of Roland Harris. He's a couple levels above me at the time. I knew him. I thought he liked me. So I wrote his name down. A few days later, I got a call. It's Roland. Hey, Roland, Shelly. And he's not sounding very happy. I'm like, Shelly, you put my name down to be your mentor. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, Roland, I thought you liked me. He said, Shelly, you've got me. Go get somebody else. Huh. Well, I learned 2 key things in that very short conversation. One, I didn't even realize he was my mentor already, but he saw himself that way. which meant that a mentor-mentee relationship, it doesn't actually have to be formal. It can be informal. Okay. And number two, he told me to go get somebody else. I can have as many mentors as I want. And frankly, that's been my approach ever since that day. And I learned not to ask people to be my mentor, because frankly, you ask somebody to be your mentor, and the first thing that happens is their eyes get wide and they literally start backing up from you, right? And why is that? It's not because you forgot to put deodorant on. No, it's because they're thinking time commitment. And they don't even know if you're worth it. They don't know if you're going to be a good mentor. They're so busy. If they weren't busy, you wouldn't ask them, right? So, no, I don't ask. I just start treating people like a mentor. And that way, I end up with a bunch of informal mentors. How do you treat people like a mentor? It's pretty straightforward. You start by asking simple questions. You don't ask them, what should I do with my career? No. You ask them first something that they can answer without even thinking about it, like getting advice on how to give a good presentation, right? How to run a meeting, right? Whatever it might be, something simple. They give you the advice, wonderful. Now here's the key. Take the advice, at least try it, and then circle back with them and let them know, thank you so much for the advice on how to give a presentation. The presentation I gave 2 days ago as a result of your advice was the best one I've given. I really appreciate that. Why do you do that? You do that because they may not even remember the conversation, but that's okay. When you come back and tell them how good you were able to do, how well you were able to do based upon their input, they're going to feel good. You're going to touch them right here. And when you touch them right here, they remember you. They remember you. And they're more likely to answer another question later on. So adopt mentors. And I have a whole section about how to do this. So adopt mentors. And by the way, one last thing on this point, Jack, if you don't mind. People think of mentors as helping them with how do they advance in their career, right? How do I get the next job? How do I think about what should be next, right? All of that. I will tell you, the most valuable mentors I've had are ones that help me do the job I already have, my current job, because I can't get the next opportunity until I nail this one. So the good news is 99% of the time, anytime you take a new job, somebody else has done it before or done something similar, whether it's in your company, in your industry, or just in the general workplace. Go find them, talk to them. People love talking about themselves. Ask them how they got there. What was their career path, right? All those things. And then ask them about the role. What works, what doesn't work. Start after that conversation on first base instead of home plate, right? Get that leg up.
That is great, great advice. And I hope you can hear that the practicality advice, how you implement it. I love the way you describe it with the practical tips that we can all use. Let's shift to the topic of inclusion and diversity. Critical topic, has been front and center for many years, but obviously this year has taken on a different dimensions. And every company, people are at different places on the journey here. How do we keep the momentum going? What is the responsibility of businesses and corporations around I&D? I'd love to get your views on that.
Sure. So first of all, I will tell you I'm cautiously optimistic about where we are. And let me talk about why I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because for the first time, the people that are actually raising awareness, declaring that this is not right, that things need to change, well, the people that are doing that represent all aspects of America. Whereas in the 60s, it was Blacks and some others, but mainly Blacks that were driving that. Now it's everyone, right? We represent all walks of life. So to me, that's encouraging. Second thing that's encouraging is the fact that businesses are actually engaging. Last time around, businesses were like, nope, this is a government issue. Let's let the government lead this. Few companies leaned in, but most did not. Now, most companies are actually engaging and realizing that the environment in which their employees live, operate, go to school, all those things actually impacts their ability to be effective employees. And they realize that companies have a role to play in their communities. So businesses for the first time are actually engaging, which I also think is a very positive thing. The third reason that I'm optimistic is for the first time, we're talking about race. You know, race was one of those topics that was so taboo. It wasn't even one of the 3 taboo topics, right? You're not supposed to talk about religion, sex, or politics, right? Those were like the 3 things that you don't say in good company. Race wasn't even on the list. It was so far buried. But now we're actually talking about it. And for the first time, people are getting a sense for other people's experiences. So I see that as also positive because it can create some empathy. So those are all the things that make me optimistic. Why the word cautious? Because we tend to be a fickle country. We pick our topics of the day and then something else comes along and gets our attention. We have a bit of ADD. It's taken us 400 years to get here. We're not going to fix it in 12 months. So the question is, are we going to have the fortitude to really see this through? That's why the cautious. And I think that employees as well as employers can really hold each other's feet to the fire to really ensure that we have the fortitude and we do see this through.
I think those are very good points, and I'm certainly hopeful that this year has been a real turning point for the U.S., for corporations, for the citizens of this country. I am hopeful, but as you say, it is a journey, and we have to stick with it for the next many decades. This is a multi-decade journey, and we're at the beginning. We've got one more minute, and maybe broaden it a little bit to, you serve on multiple boards, Verizon, Nordstrom, Okta, and Roper Technology. What are the greatest challenges that companies and the boards and boardrooms are facing today?
Oh gosh. The biggest challenge right now, frankly, is planning. We are in a time that we've really never faced before. So we've never been in a situation where we had a global pandemic, economic issues, racial disparity issues, all these things. So as companies try to actually plan, figure out what should they do, how are people going to be behaving and buying and interacting, all of those things are changing. Buyer behavior's changing. So putting in place a plan that they can actually execute against and deliver is really challenging when there's so many things that are unknown and that we haven't actually experienced before. So I would say planning for the future is one of the biggest challenges as we go into 2021. Now, that is exacerbated by the fact that depending upon what kind of industry you're in, your buyers are also changing. We have been living in a very different world now for 9 months. Well, it only takes a couple months to change habits. So we are absolutely changing habits. And as a result of changing habits, we're going to be changing what we want, what we don't want, what we're willing to do, what we're not willing to do, all of those things. And with all of those things in flux, ensuring that companies have a value proposition, have offerings, have et cetera, that they need to be able to address their customers over time is also changing. So there's a lot of dynamics going on right now. And that makes it really hard for companies. It's much easier for companies to operate when things are known, right? The fewer variables, the better. And we're in a situation where there are more variables today than I think there have ever been, at least since I've been in business.
It's certainly been a challenging year. I think most of us leaders in corporations, it's been one for the record books, that's for sure, in terms of level of challenge. Shelly, we're going to transition to the panel. And if I have one regret about this event, I wish we had 2 more hours to continue the discussion. But I'm going to introduce my colleague, Katica Roy, who is a managing director at Accenture, will facilitate the next section of the agenda. She's our Open Innovation Global Lead, and she leads our Black Founders Development Program. Kathy, over to you. But before I hand over, again, I highly recommend get the book. You will not regret it. Shelly, it's been a true pleasure having the discussion with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jack.
Jack, when you said that, I was like, wait, time's up? I grabbed so many nuggets from that. And as a wife, a mother, and a corporate executive, just, in terms of how you've managed your career, I also had a chance to read the book. It's been absolutely fabulous. And thank you so much for joining us on the panel. So we'll get a chance to get some more nuggets from Shelly. We are now, as Jack said, transitioning to a panel where we're going to have a lively discussion with some wonderful executives, very successful executives. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. And I'd love for them to answer the question in terms of what does equity and innovation mean to you and why is it important? Susan, why don't we start with you?
Great. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see everyone out here virtually. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Susan Chapman Hughes. I lead the Digital Capabilities Transformation and Operations organization for the commercial services business at American Express. And when I think about equity and innovation, I really think about it in very basic terms, which is, can we leverage innovation equally and equitably to ensure that all people have access to the things that they deserve to have? And so, when I think about how innovation has played a role in many things, there clearly are communities that have been left out of that equation. And whether we're talking about health disparities or we're talking about income disparities or opportunities for growth, leveraging innovation to help drive the solutions to some of those big challenging problems are things that I think must be made equitable if we want to really have a future for our children in particular to be able to live well. So it's great to be here.
Thank you so much. And I think that definitely follows on the points that Shellye was just speaking about. We're at a time where those things are possible, but there's some effort, there's some work that needs to be done to drive that. Katica, I will have you introduce yourself and answer the same question.
Oh, sure. My name is Katica Roy. I'm the CEO and founder of Pipeline. For those who don't know Pipeline, it's a software platform that increases the financial performance of companies through closing the intersectional gender equity gap. So gender plus race and ethnicity and age. You know what, this is not my quote, but what it made me think of was that quote that talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. In the startup world, having been someone who came from the corporate world, I worked for the CEO of SAP and then started my own company a little over 3.5 years ago. The funding, and it's gotten worse this year, even with the focus on more inclusion, but the actual funding that founders receive is so small for women and people of color, particularly women of color. To some extent, you can't even find data on it when you actually try to go research it. And so equity in innovation means that for me, the lens that I look through is that there's equity in funding and equity in valuation of startups. Because if we really want to change innovation now, but also in the future, we need to be able to change how capital flows through our systems so that, for instance, like I have a liquidity event. This is the ecosystem that exists in Silicon Valley. And now I can fund a whole broad number of diverse founders. They have a liquidity event and then you propagate it out. We got to change that. And I would say this year has been disappointing in that.
Thank you. We had an opportunity to write an article in this space earlier this year. So I think we'll get a chance to touch on this topic a little bit more as we go through the questions. Shellye, I know you've already been introduced, but I'd love for you to answer the question as well in terms of what does equity and innovation mean to you and why it's important.
Certainly, and I'm going to tee off of something that Katica said with regards to, talent. People talk about the fact that we have a talent shortage, right? Because you obviously need the right talent in order to innovate. Well, I don't believe we have a talent shortage. Certainly not a raw talent shortage. But we do have a shortage of talent identification. We do have a shortage of talent development. We do have a shortage with regards to providing the right tools and resources to the talent to be able to actually leverage the talent that we have. So we have a lot of shortages, but it's not actually of raw talent. So when I think of the whole equity and innovation, it's not even just starting companies. Everyone has the ability to innovate in whatever role that you are in and that you're providing, that you're participating in. So equity in innovation to me is providing the right support, the right opportunity, the right tools, the right, et cetera, to give everyone the opportunity to be able to participate in whatever role they want to participate in. Because once they're there, they will innovate. Study after study after study shows that if you bring people together, people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, et cetera, that's how you create your most innovative team. So we need to just do what we need to do to get them to the table so they can actually participate and have the impact.
No, fantastic. And that's one of the impetuses, if you will, to, our creation of the Black Founders Program. But on that topic of talent and the fact that, that the talent is out there, Susan, wanted to ask you, to touch on, according to research conducted by Black Innovation Alliance, venture capital firms have funded less than 1% of startups, right? This goes back to the points both Katica and Shellye are making, founded by Black and Latinx, the demographic. What are some of the ways that bias can be eliminated in this space?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because when you have critical mass of people who understand the challenges and the issues, you typically tend to get results. So you've seen this in corporate America over the years, where you get a critical mass of African Americans at more senior levels who have the ability to hire and make decisions around how you will invest that support the communities that look like them, because they typically happen to understand that. I think when you see the venture capital communities over time, that has not happened, mainly because we don't have critical mass there. And so I think, Katica, you talked about this in terms of you having a liquidation event and being able to then use that as seed to grow a whole set of, other opportunities for people that look like you. It's going to take us in this ecosystem to actually begin to help impact that. What's interesting is over the summer, I think you saw quite a few companies trying to figure out, large corporations that have venture arms, like we're one of them, trying to figure out, well, how will we play in ways to impact these communities that have been underrepresented over time. And so it's going to take those of us who sit in seats of influence and power inside corporations to influence our venture teams to go and make investments and support the growth of businesses for people, for Black, Latinx, et cetera. And it's also going to take those who have liquidity events to be able to help drive that. I think, as I think personally for myself, over time, people say, oh, well, what do you want to do when you retire? And so number one, I'm not sure that I'll ever retire, but I do realize that sitting in a digital role, playing in technology, it is going to be incumbent upon me and people like me to help build runway for companies for people that look like me. So in addition to my ability to influence that inside the company, I also have to use my capital to help seed and grow underrepresented, particularly for me. My passion is around Black female tech founders. And so we come with a lot of resources to help them learn, grow, et cetera, invest, not just in the business itself, but in how to make the business successful. And it's going to be incumbent upon many of us to be active and involved in that over time so that we can grow critical mass. And I think there's, what's exciting about it is that I personally have seen a lot of people who typically would have sat out this discussion, who felt like they were not part of it in the past 10 years, now feel like they want to be a part of it. Now they feel like they want to, and be investors. Now they feel like they want to learn more about the space. It's not their day job, but they certainly are using their influence inside the company as well as their ability to help move the needle, to help drive that forward.
I think you're absolutely right. And, I'll from an opportunity standpoint, and also going back to Shellye's book, one of the things that I took away from that in terms of, ambition being sort of encoded into your DNA as a child within your family. One of the things that I took away from my family was, there was a quote, don't chase a paycheck, chase significance. And I think we have an opportunity right now, right, to, when we are in positions that we're in, to be able to have that impact on our communities and to drive that. You mentioned women, you know, Shellye, I'd like to go back to you in terms of women of color. And, you know, obviously, the seat in the White House, you know, very recently with Kamala Harris, but we're the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the US. And according to Forbes, 89% of US businesses within the last year have been launched by women of color. How can investors better support this demographic at its current growing pace?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is go look for it. You know, people sit in their offices and then say, I can't find them. Well, you're right. They're not sitting there in your office. They're not in your neighborhood. They're not sitting there on Sand Hill Road. You have got to actually go find them. Or make it easy for them to find you, right? How do you make it easy for people to find you? By being accessible. You know, right now, venture capital firms, whether it's individual companies and or arms of companies, aren't very accessible, right? It's actually kind of daunting to go and approach. And plus, with the reputation that exists today, which is they're not going to give you money anyway, women of color, they aren't even looking half the time in terms of to that source. So you've got to actually work on marketing and presenting yourself to say, listen, we actually want to invest in this space, and putting yourself out there and becoming available and accessible. So that's one, so that you can actually start to attract people to come in. But two, it won't do you any good to have women of color come and knock on the door and give you presentations if you still listen to those presentations in the same way. And let me explain what I mean by that, because this gets to hidden bias, right? But studies have shown that it's not so much that a woman of color walks in to do a presentation and the investors immediately say, oh, we're not investing in a woman of color, right? It's not that overt. What happens though, is because she doesn't match the pattern of success that they have seen, then the investors tend to have more risk, right? They sense that there's more risk in this deal because it doesn't match what they typically see. And because they sense there's more risk, they spend most of their time in the meetings talking about the risks. What could go wrong? What happens if you don't get this customer? What if you can't get your product out on time? It's all like these negative risk questions, which then, of course, they answer. But when they walk out of the meeting, the feeling is, you know, it just doesn't feel right. Doesn't feel right in your gut. Doesn't feel right. Well, that's because you spent most of your time talking about risk and negative stuff. The same studies show that if it's actually someone who matches the pattern of what you've invested in or who you've invested in the past, that you spend most of your time talking about the opportunity. What could happen? What is the opportunity? How big is the market? What could this be? And then you walk out of that meeting feeling pretty good. You know, I have a good feeling about this one. So we have got to make sure that on the investor side, that we're getting ourselves a little educated, that we're becoming more aware so that we don't fall into these systemic traps that will basically undo the good work that I just suggested we do about making yourselves more available and open. So it's two steps. One, be more available, be more approachable, put yourself out there, let these women know you want to invest in them. And then when they show up, you've got to behave differently.
Love it. And I think absolutely correct. And I mean, I couldn't have even said it better. Now that's the investor side. That's women going out, starting their own businesses and creating jobs for other people, and helping our economy. Katica, when we look at, you know, the American Association of University Women and a study that they just did, that on average, women make 82 cents for every dollar that is made by their male counterpart. Right now, once again, me in my head going, that's like, oh, that's painful. How are you leveraging technology to explore ways to close that pay disparity gap? Right. On the one hand, I think it's probably fostering the innovation, the women who are going after to start businesses. But I think this is another part of our ecosystem that we also need to take a look at.
Yeah, well, and 82 cents on the dollar is the aggregate pay gap. You know, we actually, I mean, it gets you know, markedly worse when you intersect gender plus race and ethnicity. And actually and I will answer your question, Kathy, but we actually did a research. I'm a breadwinner mom. I have been for 12 years. And we did a research, Pipeline did a research study 2 years ago, looking through the lens of breadwinner moms and what was the pay gap of breadwinner moms. And it was an intersectional study. So gender plus race and ethnicity. And what we actually found is that as a cohort, breadwinner moms, and by the way, breadwinner moms support 40% of US households in the United States with children under the age of 18. There's 16 million of us. We support 28 million children. We have the largest gender pay gap of any cohort in the US. We earn 66 cents on the dollar. When you intersect that data with race and ethnicity, Black breadwinner moms actually have the largest pay gap, gender pay gap of any cohort of women in the workforce. It's 44 cents on the dollar. 44 cents on the dollar. And Black breadwinner moms support the majority of all Black children in the United States, and they have for the last 38 years. This is a huge issue that we need to solve, and it feeds into the ability to actually start businesses. It feeds into so many things. It is far more than just an issue of fairness. It's actually an issue of economic opportunity. Just the pay gap alone, we're leaving $512 billion on the table in the United States because we're not closing it. And oh, by the way, we're all paying for that. The American taxpayer is paying for that. Like, these are our dollars. So we actually looked at it and thought, well, at Pipeline, and pay is certainly one of the things that we address. We are, for people who may not know us, we are augmented decision making. So much like you would use Google Maps or Waze to get from point A to point B, we actually do the same thing, but for companies' human capital decisions. We intercept them, we make recommendations, track them over time. So we found a couple of things. One is that you can't close the gender pay gap by starting with pay. So it's great if a company is doing a pay equity study. The issue is that the inputs into that study are probably not equitable. So what we found is that so in other words, pay is the symptom, it's not the disease. The actual value that you place on your talent happens before that in performance and potential. That is how you're actually assessed for doing the job and the access you have, to Shelley's point, for additional coaching and mentoring to actually become a senior leader. If you fix those, you actually can fix the gender pay gap. So what we do is intercept those decisions. Essentially, right now, our systems are not equitable, because if they were, women wouldn't be 57% of college graduates and 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs. We wouldn't have a 50-point gap. And so you have to choose to be equitable. What we did was we flipped that. So we actually, if companies have the Pipeline platform, you are by default equitable. We're going to provide you a recommendation. If you choose to reject that recommendation, you are actually choosing to be inequitable. It is a very different way to deal with equity and ensure that all the pledges that you're making and the $2.3 billion that was actually committed to racial justice issues this year is actually playing out in your employee experience, the experience that people have in your company.
Thank you. The numbers, when you lay them out, are shocking. I mean, 44%, on the dollar, and obviously 57% coming out of college, and only 7% of CEOs.
Well, can I just add one more thing, which
Please.
is not to be depressing, but COVID has added an even more difficult layer on that. I mean, like in September alone, over 800,000 women dropped out of the workforce. Like, you think the gap is 50 points today. If this keeps happening and we don't actually address it, the gap is going to be 80, 90 points, right? So we have to address it now.
Yeah. Well, and just like I published an article for The Hill. Just in numbers, we've set back women's labor force participation 3 years. And since 1970, women have actually added $2 trillion to the US economy through the increased participation in the labor force. Like, this is not an issue of fairness. To Susan's point, our economy is at stake if we don't do something, and we got to do something now.
So to that point, and this is a question to all of you on a personal level, right? What have been some of the successes and challenges you've experienced in your career path in making your workplace more equitable, right? What are some of the things that we can give to the audience at large, me too, on how we remain resilient in the face of these extraordinary challenges that we're going through.
I'll start. So, there are a number of things. One of the aspects of serving on public boards that I really enjoy is the fact that you actually get to influence by asking questions. So I will tell you, on the companies in which I serve, Nordstrom announced I think it was last year. With COVID, I can't even keep track of the years and time right now. But announced the fact that they have full equity, right, in pay. It's something that they analyze, they go through, they look, and they put it out there, right? If you look at just the diversity of the boards that I sit on, right, every board I'm on 4 public boards, has at least 2 Black directors, 2 have 2 and 2 have 3. Women make up almost 50% of, kind of real quick, of one of them for sure, but all of them are over 30-35% in terms of female. And what that does is start looking at leadership teams and what leadership teams look like, whether it's at Verizon or at Nordstrom, et cetera. You'll see that it's starting, if you will, to pull through a couple of tactics. So what works? How do you do this? One, which is something I always recommend, senior C-suite people who report to the CEO and the CEO should be sponsoring. Notice I didn't say mentoring, sponsoring at least 2 people who don't look like them, right? Everybody should do it. Everybody should have 2 that don't look like them. Then if part and parcel to the strategy, diversity inclusion should not be to the side, it should be part and parcel to the strategy. And if it's part of the strategy of the company, then all good leaders should know how to hire, retain, and develop diverse employees, correct? Well, if that's the case, then it should be a requirement that you can prove it before you get promoted to certain levels, full stop. So there's a number of things that you can do to build it into the strategy of the business. And those are things that I'm involved in trying to drive. So you can have impact. And by the way, you don't have to be serving on a board of directors to have impact. You can have impact at all levels by asking effective questions.
Yeah,
I think that's fantastic. And Susan, I'm going to go to you in 1 second. It goes back to your point, right? The talent is there. It's potentially even in those companies. They just haven't sponsored them. And I'm going to use that word as well to position people for that right position. Susan?
Yeah, so first of all, I definitely want to just reiterate what Shelley just said on the board perspective. In addition to asking questions, you certainly can be a talent person that shows up and brings them active talent to the boardroom as well as to the CEO. So, when the searches for roles are opening, and so pressuring them to make sure that they have diverse slates and that you can actually bring your network of people to the table for them to consider is also, I think, another way to help influence that from a board perspective. Inside the corporation, listen, many of us have senior roles where we have the ability to hire people, fire people, build organizations. We have OpEx that we drive. And so we have to be unapologetic about ensuring that our teams are diverse and that we are giving opportunities to people who are underrepresented to continue to grow in the organization, and recognizing that their needs are different than most of the people. So showing up in a way that makes them feel supported, that helps them navigate the organization, to make sure that you're speaking up for them in the room and that you're giving them the challenging assignments to step up, all are ways that you make sure that you can help build a pipeline of people. I try to, within American Express, open myself up to all people to help coach and mentor them. But I certainly especially try to zero in on some of our top African-American and Latinx talent to make sure that they're getting what they need, because we know that inclusion means something very different for them than it does for the mass of the rest of the population of our colleagues. And they have special needs. There's no question about it. When you are the only person sitting in a room and you're, trying to figure out the norms of an organization, or you're new to the company, and it's hard to navigate. And so it is required for those of us who have been there who understand the norms of the organization to really help them navigate and help them manage their way through the organization as ways. But there's no substitute for not hiring, right? We have the ability to make decisions on personnel for the organization. And so shame on us if we don't just unapologetically create opportunities for fantastic talent who happens to be diverse to be part of our teams.
And Katica, please.
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to make a comment. So there's a couple of things, a few things more than two that I would say. One, to Shelley's point, and I think Susan's as well, so Pipeline in the platform, we actually make 5 types of recommendations. Hiring, which is actually internal hiring, and I'll talk about that in a second. Pay, performance, potential, and promotion. But on the hiring piece, we actually look at internal hiring, not external hiring. And the reason is that the best way to attract diverse talent is to ensure that your existing diverse talent is successful, and not just in the current role that they have, but across your company. And I think to Shelley's point about the fact that there's not a talent shortage, sort of the initial question, we found that, for our customers on average, when they post a job requisition, we find 86% of the time, we find 5 or more qualified candidates that can actually fill that position. So there's a lot of latent talent that's actually in organizations that can fill those positions. And, we make it possible for companies to actually see what's happening across their companies and all the way down to every single manager, so that you have a really clear view, but also understand the metrics. Representation matters, but the details behind representation matters. It's not enough just to say we have this many women or Black women at this level. We have to understand things like, what is their span of control? How many indirect versus direct resources do they control? What does that actually look like? Because that actually tells a story in terms of how well resourced you are to actually be successful in a company. We still have, I think to Susan's point as well, we need to begin to shift the responsibility away from the people who are experiencing inequity, which by default, if you are experiencing inequity, you do not have power, because you would not be experiencing it if you were in power. It's just that simple. And start to put it, where it belongs, which is on the people who are making decisions, and really enable them with technology and artificial intelligence and tools like that to actually make those decisions. I will tell you, as a breadwinner mom, and I'm sure Susan and Shelley have similar stories, and the specifics are probably different, but as a breadwinner mom, I fought to be paid equitably twice and won. And I didn't file a lawsuit, but I figured out what I needed to do to stick up for myself. And that was pretty terrifying, because I've got 3 other people that rely on me to make sure that they are okay. And I think that we got to move away from that and actually proactively make sure that people are included, that, that instead of me having to speak up about not being paid equitably, that my manager would come to me and say, you know what, you're not being paid equitably, we're going to give you a raise. And that's the system we really need to create if we're actually going to achieve equity and make it stick.
No, fantastic. Couldn't say it more or better. One of the nuggets that I wanted to just highlight, I think, from all of these conversations, and then specifically, I think something that Shelley mentioned as well, is, as Susan said, we're in the positions where we should absolutely be going out there and hiring and making sure that we have diverse teams. But I think it should be part of a corporation's lexicon that anybody in a leadership position, it doesn't matter what race, culture you're from, should be doing the exact same thing. And you're measured on that in terms of getting to that next level, which I think, Katica, goes to your point as well. We've just got a few minutes left. So I'm going to pose this question to all of you as well. What one piece of advice would you give to the audience, right? What can they do to sustain the tools and strategies that we've discussed today? Katica, why don't we start with you?
Outside of implement Pipeline? sorry. I don't normally I had to make a joke. So
It's all good.
I'm sorry. I think that, we have to have, I believe, one of the things, and Kathy, you know this because we email, and one of my taglines, and it's in the signature of my email, is be brave. And it was initially there as a reminder to myself, for me to be brave. I think to Shelley's point about imposter syndrome and, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, to dig deep and to be brave and to have a voice, it is why I left the corporate world in a fairly lucrative career to actually start Pipeline. That harkened back to me having to stand up to be paid equitably, and committing that after I had that experience, that if you reported to me, I was going to make sure that not only were you paid equitably, and I would do whatever I could to make that happen, but that also you had equity of opportunity. That was my responsibility. And obviously that led to starting Pipeline, but I think you have to find it within yourself to be able to walk through those things, whatever your stories are. I'm the daughter of an immigrant and a refugee. That has a lot to do with what drives me forward on that, but you have to be able to move that forward.
Susan?
Yeah, I mean, we find ourselves at a very interesting inflection point where this summer you have now seen many Fortune 500 CEOs step up and declare that their legacy is going to be to change this, right? The Business Roundtable, led by the CEO of Walmart, they've all made public declarations about what they are going to do in order to help change the conversation so that we're not having the same conversation in the future. And so I think, look, you now have a group of people that I'm not sure we would have called allies before, who are ripe for the conversation and they want to act. And so each one of us has the ability within our own company to connect with those actions that our company is making and hold them accountable. And also be active in the role to help them achieve the goals that they've set forth. Because I do think that a lot of people are willing, but they don't always have all the answers. And so this is going to require a partnership for all of us to move the needle forward. But I think we have more willing participants now than we ever have before. And we should not lose the momentum that is moving forward.
Thank you. And Shellye?
I agree absolutely with what Katica and Susan shared in terms of what you can do. What I would also add is realize that life isn't fair. I talk about this in the book too. It's just not for anybody, by the way, for a lot of different reasons. So don't wait for all this to get fixed and then think things are going to be easy, because that's not going to happen in the short term. So it's important that you continue to be intentional and that you continue to take responsibility for your career and what you can do, and making sure that you are, as Katica said, asking for what you deserve, that you are helping and supporting others, that you're being both a good employee personally, but you're also advocating and allying with others to be able to bring others forward with you. Because the good news is you can achieve what you want. It's hard work. Absolutely. It's frustrating at times. And by the way, you can't do it by yourself. I certainly didn't. So take responsibility for your career, get help from others, and, be brave, as Katica said, and continue to push the needle.
Thank you so much. And I'll leave it with those statements. Be brave, take advantage of the moment and the allies that are there, and to be unapologetically ambitious. I definitely get a chance to read Shellye's book. Thank you everyone for joining us for this panel. Thank you to these wonderful executives for sharing your wisdom with us. Before we move on to the Q&A session, I'd like to take a moment to welcome Tiffany Wilson, President and CEO of the University City Science Center, which runs Venture Cafe in Philadelphia. For more than 50 years, the Science Center has been at the center of innovation and discovery. And as the first and largest urban research park, the Science Center has consistently evolved to address the changing needs of the innovation economy. Today, that means a focus on driving racial equity in the tech and life sciences sectors. Over the past decade, the Science Center has focused its work on democratizing innovation by intentionally removing barriers for underrepresented communities from equitable participation in the innovation ecosystem. That work is showing dividends. And these companies, more than 50% of the companies the Science Center support are minority and female founded, just what we were talking about today. And they've experienced an 80% success rate, validating the advantage of diversity as a business asset. The Science Center's venture cafe community, 44% are non-Caucasian, highlighting the strengths of diverse people to generate new ideas and advance civic interests. Tiffany Wilson joined the Science Center just over a month ago to build on that success and work to ensure there's equitable access to economic and business opportunity for all. Tiffany, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Shelley, and the panel for sharing your expertise and experiences. I'm closing out the week so inspired and energized by your insights. Shelley, I ordered your book this afternoon, so I'm looking forward to reading that over the weekend. I wanted to share a special thank you to Accenture Ventures for sponsoring this evening's sessions and really highlighting the need for more equitable innovation ecosystems. As Nicole mentioned, kicking things off, it's really time for us to move beyond the talking points on these issues, and it's a real call to action, I think, for all of us tonight's discussion. As CEO of the Science Center, I'm really focusing on the strengths of commercializing promising technologies, convening a diverse set of stakeholders in the entrepreneurial community like we're doing this evening at Venture Cafe, and cultivating a STEM workforce. The program today is particularly relevant as the Science Center is currently running our Launch Lane Accelerator, which is supported by the Kauffman Foundation. Kauffman awarded the Science Center a grant to build a more equitable ecosystem for founders and startups to really remove a lot of those barriers to launching companies. We really want to have an impact that was really highlighted tonight. Wanted to let everyone know that our next Launch Lane cohort is focused on digital health solutions that are transformative, that improve patient care and safety, that enhance wellness and patient independence. Our applications are open till December 7th, and the cohort begins in March. All of our applicants should have a product really at least at a prototype stage, and we'll put a link in the chat for applications. But we're going to be providing these cohorts with a safe note of up to $50,000 in funding, access to our lab and incubator space, guidance, warm introductions, feedback from experts, and access to investors. And so we're really looking forward to seeing a diverse mix of founders apply to Launch Lane. As Shelley mentioned during her remarks, we have to have the fortitude to see this through. And so I want to make sure that the Science Center is playing a role in having the strength and persistence to really make a difference in our community. Finally, if you're not sure whether you are a digital health company or at the right stage development, please let us know. Reach out to us at launchlane@sciencecenter.org, and we'll drop a note in the chat as well. Thanks again to the panel and to Accenture Ventures, and I'll turn it back over to you, Kathy, for Q&A.
So wasn't sure if anyone had summarized those, but I will go ahead and look through. Fantastic conversation that we had with everyone. And want to once again thank everyone for joining us and being able to do that. As we said, diversity and inclusion should be, part and parcel to the strategy of a company. I know one of the questions was really around sponsorship and what that looks like. Shelley wasn't able to stay with us from a Q&A perspective, but I'll ask either, Katica or Susan if they're still available, or others. One of the things that I will add to that question from a sponsorship perspective is and Shelley spoke about this a little bit as well. It's positioning people, right? How do you position people and make sure that they're in the right place, that they're getting the mentor and coaching necessary to get to that next level? one of the things that, I learned about this summer, it's a question or a topic, or it was called the glass ceiling, right? And it's a concept of, a woman or a minority getting elevated to a role that they are quite capable to do, but there comes with it an expectation potentially that they are going to, be able to solve all of the issues or questions that maybe that a company hasn't solved prior to that. And we've got to make sure from a sponsorship perspective that when we do elevate people to these roles, that we're also giving them support to be able to address that. But if anyone on the panel, Susan or Katica, want to comment on sponsorship, would love to get some words.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot progress without sponsorship, and it's such a tricky thing, right? Because in corporations, oftentimes I'll ask the question and I'll be like, so, how many of y'all feel like you have a sponsor? And, a lot of hands will go up. How many people feel like they have multiple sponsors? And then like almost no hands go up. And so it's really tricky because not having multiple sponsors means you end up being at the whim of the changes in the organization. And so your sponsor could leave and then you're screwed. And so, but when you're, a Black or a Latinx person, it's hard for you to always know who's sponsoring you. And B, it's not always easy to, break those barriers so that they know you, because, sponsorship becomes this thing about commonality and sometimes candidly, it's like, oh, do I like you? Because the feeling is they have to be willing to use their gravitas and their reputation and their power, most importantly, to create an opportunity for you. And so I think that we have to push more for those relationships to develop so that people have access to the folks who have power. And we have to challenge those who have power around how much they're spending their time and energy seeking to sponsor and get to know and support people who look differently than they do. Now, the other piece is we have to actively sponsor. Like, we have to be in the room speaking up. That's why it's so critical to have diversity on senior leadership teams across corporations, because that one time you're not in the meeting is the one time that, the group starts having conversations about things. Sometimes, candidly, they don't even know what they're talking about. And so your ability to be like, no, hold on, that person, I've been sitting here listening to this conversation, and every single last woman you've talked about, you've said she has sharp elbows and is like, blah, 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 blah. And all the men who are like just aggressive and great and it's so fantastic. Or, it's really hard for me to, make a connection with this guy over here. We had a situation once where one of our senior leaders described one of our Black colleagues as like being big and like menacing and like, but yet, and I was like, stop. You can't describe him like that. You don't describe anybody else like that. I can give you two other people in the room who look exactly like him. One happens to be white and one happens to be Black. And they were like, oh my God, I didn't realize the bias I was bringing to the discussion. And so our ability to, step in there and be vocal is really important. The reality is that you also need sponsors that are outside of your company. Because, as Black people, we don't really have the opportunity to always think that great opportunity is going to be at the company that you're at. And so having optionality and people who will pull you if they get a great opportunity somewhere else to another place, important. Because that might be the road that's going to give you the opportunity to keep growing and developing your career. We don't have the benefit of putting all of our eggs in one basket, unfortunately. You're on mute.
Sure. So I was answering a question in the chat, Kathy. I was helping you out.
Thank you.
Well,
I keep forgetting to take off the mute.
Yeah, there's a good book called "Forget a Mentor, Get a Sponsor," which I would recommend. I have it. It's kind of a thin book, but I think it really asking people to advocate for you. I mean, that's really what a sponsor is, that they are essentially busting bias for you to say, this person's ready for this job. We're going to put them forward. And so, getting folks who will do that and do that willingly. And I think to Susan's point, getting more than one is probably a good idea.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you both. I've been getting pinged in the background because, as I was told, we gave you a little extra nugget in terms of answering those questions. And that's a book that I'm actually going to go out and take a look at. We actually were at time at 6 p.m. Eastern. So I want to say thank you to everyone who was able to join us today. I'm hoping that you were able to take away some nuggets. I'm sorry that we went over a little bit, but I think we got a little extra goodness from both Susan and Katica. So thank you very much. I'm not sure if there's someone else who's closing it out, Karen or Ari, just let me know.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you so much, everyone, for a great discussion. And Kathy, you can be unapologetically awesome. Thank you.
Thank you
for leading the panel. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Shellye Archambeau, Nicole Tranchitella, Jack Azagury, Katica Roy, Susan Chapman, and everyone for joining us today. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all, everyone.